Welcome back to Newslink. We've got lots for you this morning. Let's take you back to one of our top stories now. Justice Minister Ronald Lamola says an extradition treaty with the United Arab Emirates will come into effect on the 10th of next month. This opens the way for members of the Gupta family to be brought back into South Africa. For some legal analysis now, we're joined by Dire Tladi, who's a professor of international law at the University of Pretoria. Professor, thank you very much for your time. Now, first of all, should we really be hopeful that this treaty is going to assist us in bringing the Guptas back into our country and getting the answers that South Africans have been looking for?
Well, the short answer to that question is it depends on what the treaty says. And I haven't seen the treaty, I have to say. But there's just two things I want to say maybe to start off the conversation. The first part is that generally, as far as international law is concerned, at least, states are entitled to extradite without a treaty. Extradition treaties make things simpler, and they facilitate and they create certain obligations that if that particular individual or set of individuals and that particular crime falls within the scope of the treaty, then the other state is obliged to extradite. But it always depends on the content of the treaty. So, for example, the treaty might say that certain offenses are not extraditable as between those states. A common provision is that a state does not have to extradite, even if there's an extradition treaty, if the person sought is a national of that state. So these are some of the exclusionary clauses that we see in some extradition treaties.
All right, so if a state is allowed, even without a treaty, to extradite somebody that's done badly in their country, does it mean the country that they're trying to extradite the person from is also allowed to say, no, we don't want you to have our person?
You're going to have to repeat that question because I missed the first bit. I was trying to make sense of it, but you're going to have to repeat the first bit of the question.
Legally, just so we understand, because remember in South Africa, we've had many incidents of your Shireen Duvani, for instance. We've had your al-Bashir on our side, for instance. Yeah. So is another country allowed to, like you're saying, other states, every state is allowed to actually extradite someone even without a treaty. So is the states where the extradition is happening allowed to also say, actually, no, we don't agree to you trying to get this person into your country, so you can't have them?
Yeah, so if we take the scenario, for example, so I understand your question to be, is the UAE entitled to say, no, you can't have this person, no, we will not extradite this person to you?
Exactly.
The answer to that question is twofold. So if there's no extradition treaty, as is the case currently, so if there's no extradition treaty in force, as is the case currently, then the state is entitled to say, no, we will not extradite. And it doesn't have to give reasons. The reverse of that, so now we've been told that we have an extradition treaty which will enter into force on the 10th of July. So from the 10th of July or the 11th of July, the question will be different. If the UAE does not want to extradite, then it will have to look at the treaty and say, well, this particular instance that you're requesting falls under one of the exceptions to the treaty, therefore we will not be able to extradite. So the difference is, if the UAE does not want to extradite in those instances, they will have to explain, provide reasons why they don't extradite, and it has to be in accordance with the treaty. So that's why I say at the very beginning that it's very important to know what the treaty says.
So I guess it's very important to know what the treaty says. Even on the 10th of July, it doesn't necessarily mean South Africans can celebrate on that day and say soon we'll have these guys back in the country, because how long does it take after the treaty is into effect to actually start working in our favor?
Right, and that's the other part of, so the second part of the question. So now say we have looked at the treaty, and I'm sure the justice officials that have advised Minister Lamola have looked at the treaty, and they're confident that this particular instance falls within the extradition treaty. I'm assuming that's the case. So now comes to your question. The extradition request is made. There has to be a process, and the processes are different. So I listened very carefully to the interview by Mr. Lamola, and he described our processes. I don't know what the UAE process is, but ultimately the executive will have to make a decision, say, yes, this particular extradition falls within this extradition treaty, so we're going to allow extradition. But even that is only the first part. Normally what happens is the individual or the individuals themselves can challenge the state. So in this instance, we're talking about the Guptas. The Guptas themselves can challenge the UAE to say your decision to extradite is wrong. And then there's a whole legal process there. So that part wasn't mentioned, but that's also an important part. And very often, that's the reason why extradition processes take long, because the affected person, what Minister Lamola referred to as persons of interest, ultimately they also generally have rights to challenge the decision by the state to extradite.
Professor Dire Tladi from the University of Pretoria, thank you very much for your time.